experience in publishing some fantastic research papers, mostly in the area of implementation theory, mechanism design, game theory, and even some papers in decision theory. And these very well reflect his interests, and some of the findings from his recent research works have the potential to overturn many established results in these areas. So Professor Muto holds a PhD in economics from Hitotsubashi University, and he was at Autonoma Barcelona a few years after his PhD, for pursuing a postdoc. So and now he's at Yokohama National University. So that's his introduction. So Professor Muto, now I think you may begin the talk. Professor Muto is going to be talking about implementation in undominated strategies with applications to auction design, public good provision, and matching today. So Nozomu.
Oh, thank you very much for introducing me.
I'm sorry to intervene. Yeah. You know, Nozomu, hi Nozomu, and
okay.
I really faced a very hard time today to join this WebEx. You know, I'm not used to, and I can understand this WebEx is not really very user friendly. Nozomu, have you ever used WebEx? We are very.
This is the first time. This is the first time. Yeah.
Yes, I have also soiled my hands with trying WebEx here in IIT Jodhpur, but you know, I'm really sorry. It was very embarrassing. I think Joydeep also, you know, is unable to join. It was asking to download some weird add-on or something like that. So I'm sorry I couldn't introduce you, but I think Ruhi has already done the job. Thanks, Ruhi. And Nozomu, welcome, and please go ahead with the talk. I won't.
Okay. So let me start. So thank you very much for introducing me in details. This is the title of the paper, and this is a joint work with Saptarshi and Arnab Sen at Indian Statistical Institute. You know, this is the paper about mechanism design in microeconomics. So if you are not familiar with it, please interrupt me anytime when you find anything unclear or anything that you don't know. So here is the outline of today's talk. So first, I'd like to make some introduction on mechanism design and some related issues in my paper. And next, I'm going to introduce the formal model, mathematical model of implementation in undominated strategies. And after that, I'm going to talk about economic applications. And then I'd like to talk about the main theorem of the paper, which is a sufficient condition for implementation in the general environment. And but I'm afraid I'm going to have no time to talk about construction of the implementing mechanism in detail. I hope to talk about this very briefly. And in the last, I'm going to talk about the conclusion. So let me introduce mechanism design theory. So we start with some economic entity, what we call a designer here, designer who wants to achieve a certain objective in the society. There are many examples in economics. For example, an auctioneer who holds an auction wants to maximize the revenue from the auction, or a municipal government wants to improve the resident welfare by providing public goods. But this objective depends on the state of the society, specifically preferences of the agent in the society in this study. But while the designer has the power to enforce the outcome, the designer does not know the preferences of the agent. This is the problem of asymmetric information. For example, in the problem of auctions, the auctioneer wants more revenue. To do this, the auctioneer wants to sell the goods to the buyer with the highest variation. But the auctioneer does not know who holds the highest valuation, which buyer holds the highest valuation. This is the problem of asymmetric information. So if the auctioneer wants to sell the goods to the buyer with the highest valuation, this auctioneer or the designer needs to elicit the preferences or the valuations of the buyers somehow. So to do this, the designer requests the agent to play the game. This is some solution suggested in the theory of mechanism design. This game is called the mechanism. So the designer determines the role of the game and make the agent play the game here. Here, the agent choices in the mechanism should reflect their preferences. So if the designer observed the agent choices to know the agent preferences. The designer needs to design the mechanism properly to implement the desired outcome depending on the preferences of the agent. And in general, implementation theory discusses existence of a mechanism that achieves the designer's objective. So in a broad sense, this is the goal of our paper here. But there are still some problems that remain. So in this case, I said the asymmetric information matters, but the role of the mechanism is affected by to what extent the designer knows the agent. For example, the designer may know the probability distribution of the preferences or the agent knowledge of rationality of the others, but in reality, it's very difficult to precisely pin down the probability distribution. The designer may know the distribution vaguely, but in general, it's almost impossible to precisely know the probability distribution. So if the mechanism depends upon the fine details too much, the intended goal will not be achieved. This is the motivation of the robustness in mechanism design. In this sense, the mechanism should be robust. So a robust mechanism should implement the same outcome irrelevant to the assumption on the details of the environment. In this sense, we want robustness in mechanism design. Well, so these robustness issues are discussed in the literature of mechanism design, and the traditional answer is to employ dominant strategy implementation. This is very traditional, and there are more modern approaches, but in this paper we stick to the traditional approach. This dominant strategy implementation is employs weakly dominant strategies as an equilibrium notion in the mechanism. But so dominant strategy implementation was adopted in many papers in mechanism design, but it is pointed out that dominant strategy implementation is often too strong to assume. For example, the classical Gilbert-Satterthwaite impossibility theorem says that there exists no social choice rule which is dominant strategy implementable, Pareto efficient, and non-dictatorial. This is a problem, and many papers proposed some relaxation of these conditions. For example, some papers considered Bayesian implementation instead of dominant strategy, or some other papers consider restriction of the domain of the preferences or anything. In this paper, we employ some other relaxation of the implicit assumption. That is, by definition, if a game has a dominant strategy, it is unique. So this means that in dominant strategy implementation, the implemented outcome at a single state must be unique. This is an implicit assumption. This uniqueness is an implicit assumption of dominant strategy implementation. In this study, in this paper, we allow for multiple alternatives implemented at a single state. So if you pin down preference profiles of every agent, you cannot determine a single outcome to be implemented. We allow for multiple alternatives, multiple possibilities. This is some sort of implementation of a social choice correspondence. Correspondence is a mathematical terminology, not a function. It's a multi-valued function. So in this sense, this is more permissive notion of implementation than dominant strategy implementation. More specifically, we consider implementation in undominated strategies, as in the title of the paper. This was considered by Borgers and Jackson in early 1990s, and this is a sort of classical problem in the theory of mechanism design. The definition of this implementation is avoidance of weakly dominated strategies. This is a single round elimination, not iterative elimination. So this is a robust notion of implementation, because the dominance relation is robust to, for example, change of the distribution of the preference, this probability distribution of the preferences or anything. But in exchange, in general, there are multiple strategies that survive the elimination procedure. So there are multiple outcomes implemented at a single state. In this sense, this concept is more permissive than implementation in dominant strategies. Because of this relaxation, we face some complications. For example, the revelation principle does not apply here because we consider flow implementation. This means that you cannot stick to the direct mechanisms. You need indirect mechanisms in the sense that you may need very large set of the message profiles. So you need more messages, and the problem tends to be more complicated. Well, but we consider not every mechanism is good, so we focus on finite mechanisms. This finiteness issue will be revisited later. Well, in this problem, we want to consider what social choice correspondence is implementable in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. And there are a few necessary conditions for implementation in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. For example, in Jackson himself proved that a condition called strategy resistance is a necessary condition. And after that, there are chain dominance and strong chain dominance. These are also necessary conditions. But in contrast, little has been known about sufficient conditions. This means that what mechanism is what mechanism can be an implementing mechanism in undominated strategies. This was not known previously, except for some particular specific restricted environments. In this paper, we have found a tractable sufficient condition for implementation of a social choice correspondence in the general environment. So under some conditions, we have found how to construct the implementing mechanism in undominated strategies. And this condition is very tractable and easily applicable to many environments in economics. For example, in this paper, we consider applications to the problem of auctions, public good provision, and matching. And there will be more potential applications. In these applications, we find implementable social choice correspondences which are in some sense better than classic strategy proof social choice functions. But to state this, we need to clarify what is a better social choice correspondence. Let me clarify this. Suppose that the mechanism designer has a rational state-dependent preference between feasible outcomes. Well, but in this case, it is not very clear what is a normative criterion about ranking social choice correspondences, because in general, the comparison between a set versus a set is not very clear. What we did in the paper is to follow a criterion introduced by Borges and Smith in their paper in 2012 in AER papers and proceedings. This is a partial ordering between two social choice correspondences. The statement is here. A social choice correspondence F outperforms another social choice correspondence G if there are two conditions. At every state, the designer weakly prefers any outcome given by F to that by G, and at some state, the designer strictly prefers some outcome given by F to that by G. So in some sense, this is a weak dominance between two social choice correspondences. In the typical case, G is a function rather than a correspondence. In this case, F outperforms G if at every state, the worst outcome among those given by F is the same as that by G. So please look at this figure. In this case, the implemented outcomes by F is ranked according to the designer's preference at theta. And the worst one is the same as the outcome given by G here. In this case, we say that F is better than F is better than G. If you consider the worst cases, these are the same, but it will be very natural to consider that F is better than G here. And on the way around, if you start with the function G, then F is said to be given by adding better outcomes to G, better in terms of the designer's preference at theta. As I told you, there are several necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. And in applications, I told you that there are 3 applications in the paper. In auctions, the so-called the full surplus extraction outcome is added to the second price auction. This social choice correspondence is implementable in undominated strategies. So this social choice correspondence outperforms the second price auction, the very standard one. And in the second problem of public good provision, the budget balance outcome is added to the VCG, Vickery-Groves mechanism. So this social choice correspondence is we show that this social correspondence is implementable in undominated strategies, and this social choice correspondence outperforms the standard BCG mechanism. And this social choice correspondence is also efficient and individually rational. And in the third problem, two-sided matching, for example, consider the standard one-to-one marriage problem and assume that only men's incentives are considered. Then, the men optimal stable matching is strategy proof, but there is a social choice correspondence given by any stable matchings added to the man optimal stable matching. This social correspondence is implementable in undominated strategies and outperforms the optimal stable matching social choice function. If the designer considers the women's preferences, then this social choice correspondence outperforms the optimal stable matching. This is the outline of the application, and there are many related papers, but let me skip this here. Okay, this Lee and Wojtek paper is closest to our result, but and they provided some sufficient conditions for mechanism, for social choice function to be outperformed by some social choice correspondence, but their condition is independent of ours. So we can say that these are independent results. Okay. So I'd like to proceed to the formal model here. Is it okay? Okay, so the model is very standard. Let me explain. There are a finite set of agents, n agent, and there is a finite set of alternatives. And we assume that each agent has a rational preference over A, which is his private information. This is very standard. So this is a case of private values. And we can consider the arbitrary preference restriction, and the cap F is social choice correspondence. And this is an indirect mechanism. M is the set of message profiles, and G is the outcome function. If each agent reports some message to the designer, then the designer determines some outcome according to the reported message profiles. And some message Mi weakly dominates Mi prime at preference Ri if the outcome given by Mi is weakly better than the outcome given by Mi prime for all or M minus I, and the outcome given by Mi is strictly better than the outcome given by Mi prime for some M minus I. This is the weak dominance. Okay, so this is the implementation in undominated strategies. This mechanism implements a social choice correspondence F in undominated strategies if A is assigned by the social choice correspondence if and only if there is some message profile such that Mi is undominated for each agent and A is implemented by this message profile. And this is a if and only if condition. This called the exact full implementation. And this is if f is a function, this is the dominant strategy implementation. So this is a natural extension of the dominant strategy implementation. And when there's no restriction on the set of mechanisms, Jackson showed that under very weak condition, any social choice correspondence is implementable in undominated strategies. So we stick to the finite mechanisms. This is because Jackson introduced bounded mechanisms. Bounded mechanisms prohibits an infinite chain of dominance relations. So Jackson advocated this bounded mechanisms that in this paper we stick to finite mechanisms because a finite mechanism is always bounded, but not vice versa. So it's okay to stick to finite mechanisms in this paper. Okay, let me talk about applications in economics. In auctions, we consider very simple environment of auctions. Very standard one. There are n bidders, and these bidders have private values with quasi-linear utility functions, and let theta I be bidder i's variation. And because we stick to finite mechanisms, let us assume that types are discretized. There are only finite types. But even if there are infinite types, we can construct a bounded mechanism that implements the social choice correspondence that we are going to consider next. So this discretization is not a problem here. And the standard second price auction social choice function is denoted by f second r of theta, with reserve price r. And you can consider any tie-breaking rule here. And as long as the dominant strategy or Bayesian Nash equilibrium is considered, the auctioneer is unable to earn a larger expected revenue if the reserve price is properly chosen. And let f first be the social choice function given by the first price auction outcome when we assume truthful bidding. If bidders bid truthfully, the outcome in the first price auction is the full surplus extraction. So, and let f cap fr be the union of these two auctions. Then we can prove that for each R, this social choice correspondence is implemented in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. If you want to maximize the revenue from the auction, this first price auction is the best one. So you can add a better outcome here to the standard second price auction. The next example is provision of public goods. This is also very standard. There are n agents with private values with quasi-linear utility functions. And for simplicity, let's consider binary decision of provision. If P is 1, a unit, so this is an indivisible public good, a unit of the public good provided with total cost C. And if P is 0, the public good is not provided. And let theta be the valuation of the public good. And as in the last case, types are discretized. And let P star be the efficient decision function given by this one. If the cost is lower than the total valuation, then the public good should be provided, and otherwise the good should not be provided. In this case, the classical argument says that the pivotal VCG payment is has some good properties. It is efficient, ex-post efficient, strategy proof, and ex-post individual rationale. So this is good. This was the very classical argument, but it is also known that this VCG mechanism is not budget balanced in the sense that the designer needs subsidization to implement this mechanism. So let's consider a first-best social choice function satisfying this one. This means that no subsidization is necessary here, but it's still efficient. And let cap F be the union of these mechanisms. Then we can show that this social choice correspondence is implemented in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. And if the mechanism designer wants to minimize the deficit, minimize subsidization, then this social choice correspondence is better than the VCG mechanism. And the third one, let's consider the Gale-Shapley standard marriage problem. There are N men and there are M women. And we consider marriage matchings between these men and women. And we assume that every agent has a strict preference over the set of agents on the other side, along with the outcome remaining single. And we focus on men's incentive problem, so suppose that women's preferences are known and fixed. In this case, the well-known classical result says that the men optimal stable matching social choice function is strategy proof for men. But in general, there are other stable matchings in general. So let calligraphic S be the social choice correspondence assigning all stable matchings at each preference profile. If the designer respects women's preferences, then S outperforms the men optimal stable matching social choice function because it is known that men optimal stable matching is the worst one for with respect to women's preferences in the set of stable matchings. And we showed that the stable matching social choice correspondence is implemented in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. And these three applications are given as a corollary of our main theorem in the general case. Let me talk about this. In the general case, we consider a sufficient condition which consists of three conditions. First, the strategy resistance is introduced by Jackson himself. It is a sort of strategy proofness. Sorry, but because of time constraint, let me skip here. This is Jackson showed that this is a necessary condition. So any sufficient condition must include a necessary condition. So we assume strategy resistance. The second one is related to range stop selections. This is a new concept in this paper, but the definition is simple. If you have some social choice correspondence and agent I, you can define a social choice function Ti, which is called range stop selection of agent I from F. If for each preference profile, Ti at Ri. Ti of Ri is the most preferred alternative among the set of outcomes given by cap F with respect to Ri. So this is the top alternative in the range of the social choice correspondence. In general, there might be a tie in the preferences, so there might be multiple range of selections. But if the preferences are strict, the range of selection is unique. And our assumption is that existence of a strategy-proof range of selection of every agent. This is not an obvious condition, even under strategy resistance. If F satisfies strategy resistance and Ti is a range of selection, then it can be shown that Ti is strategy proof for agent I. But if J is not I, then Ti may not be strategy proof for agent J, because Ti is the best outcome for agent I. So this may not be good for agent J. So this relation may hold. In this sense, we need to assume strategy proofness of range of selections. And if we assume this, then we can interpret this condition from the other angle, or when we have a strategy proof social choice function, for example, or second price auction, then we can add to small f worse alternative with respect to agent as preference and generate a social choice correspondence with small f being a range of selection of I from S. So in the applications, this social choice correspondence is given by adding the free surplus extraction outcome to the second price auction or whatsoever. So this existence of social choice, existence of strategy proof range of selection is crucial in this condition. The third one is called the flip condition, which is technical, but not very strong. The flip condition consists of two conditions. The first condition says that for each preference, for each pair of preferences, there is a pair of alternatives that satisfy this condition. X is better than Y in terms of Pi, and Y is better than X in terms of Ri prime. This pair of alternatives essentially exists if these two preferences are not the same. So this first condition is very weak. And the second condition says that X and Y is worse than the alternative given by Tj. This says that agent J dislikes X and Y. This can be done if these two alternatives involves a large monetary payment. And because we do not assume X and Y is a part of implemented alternatives, so you can usually construct these alternatives in most environments. So our general sufficient condition says that if we have these three conditions, then F is implemented in undominated strategies by a finite mechanism. So this is our main theorem here. And next, I should talk about construction of the mechanism, but because of the time constraint, I'd like to skip this one. So let me it will be better to conclude here. So in this paper, we consider implementation in undominated strategies by finite mechanism, and we provide a tractable sufficient condition, and we find the implemented mechanisms which outperform the classic strategy proof ones. So I think I should finish here.
Okay, thanks, Nozomu. You still have around 10 minutes, so if you want to, go ahead with something more. Otherwise, it's okay.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, Ruhi, would you please take over from here to kind of moderate the session and ask others if they have any questions?
Okay, thanks, Nozomu. Uh, so we have panelists here. So let's see if there are any questions that people want to ask. So
Ask a question. Shall I ask a
Yes.
general question?
yes, sure, Professor Chaudhary, go on.
Yeah. So thanks for the nice talk. And
Thank you.
Professor Muto, and although I'm not in this area, but I have some idea of these agents from a computer science perspective, agents and dominance relations and auctions. So this is a very general question in the sense that in all of these, the world is actually deterministic and everybody is taking a rational decision. The agents are rational.
Yes.
Now, if the agents are irrational, or in another way, if we really look at kind of random games, so in such cases, this kind of deterministic dominance relations will possibly not work, isn't it?
Of course, yes. So yes, the problem of sort of rationality or bounded rationality is also important in recent theories. And if you want to,
There's some
sorry, somebody's talking.
I request the participants to please mute your mics, then Professor Chaudhary and Professor Muto.
Okay, so if agent, in this paper, agent are rational. That agent can take in the sense that agent avoid weakly dominated strategies. But if you want to consider agents not rational in some sense, okay.
Fine.
Okay, so my answer is that if you want to consider in some sense irrational agents, then the standard way to treat this irrationality is formalize how the agent acts in some sense, perhaps so the agent are say bounded irrational in many senses. So we need to pin down what is the in what sense they are not rational. For example, they consider some others utilities, or in some sense they cannot estimate the expectation probabilities accurately or something. So depending on these irrationality assumptions, you can formalize how the agent behave, and depending on that assumptions, the designer can formalize appropriately, formalize the games, the rules of the games appropriately. So basically, the bounded rationality problem is there are various problems of bounded rational agents, and depending on what you consider, what irrationality you consider, the problem differs significantly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, thanks, Professor Chaudhary. Nozomu, I also have a quick question. So it would be great if you can explain, how these results that you have presented today, how they make an advance over the existing results, especially for a general audience. If you could just talk about it for a little bit, that would be really wonderful.
Excuse me. The question is about the what to do apart from existence.
No, not about the existence, but say about, how these results in this paper, how they have made an advance over the existing results that are there in the literature. And if you could talk about it for a
Okay.
more general
Yeah,
audience
yeah,
for
yeah.
a minute, yeah.
So, okay, so if you so for example, in applications, we consider these ones, and for example, it is some very standard result that it was very standard result that the second price auction with some reserve price was the best one in some sense. But if you do not stick to dominant strategy implementation or any implementation with unique outcomes at a single state, if you allow for multiple outcomes, then there might be room for improvement of this classical result. In this public good provision problem or two-sided matching problem, these problems, for example, in public good provision problem, the BCG is the best in the sense that if require efficiency and export individual rationality, then this budget balancedness cannot be achieved. This was the classical result in the theory of public good provision. But if you allow for multiple outcomes, then it might be possible to achieve budget balancedness while maintaining efficiency and individual rationality. So this is somewhat a surprising result that overturned the classical knowledge of this theory.
Okay. Professor Chaudhary, do you any more questions? And after that, I'll proceed to the other panelists.
Yeah, please move forward. I don't have any other questions.
Okay. So our panelists here, Dr. Tuteja, Saptarshi, and the others, are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'll move to the audience questions. Okay, so we have a question from the audience, so it's a bit technical in nature. So, Nozomu, could you please explain the difference between range top selections and strategy resistance once again?
Okay.
So, yeah.
This is somewhat this is an important part of the paper. Thank you very much. So let me review the definition. The range top selection is the most preferred alternative among the set of alternatives given by the social choice correspondence. And if you assume strategy resistance, then so I didn't talk about strategy resistance very much. This strategy resistance condition says that for each preference profile and for each agent and each preference and each alternative implement assigned at Ri prime, then there exists some alternative A that is better than B in terms of the initial preference Ri. So this can be interpreted that if your true preference is Ri, then you consider reporting a false preference Ri prime. Then if you choose if you choose some good alternative A from the set of outcomes assigned at Ri, then you have no incentive to reporting a false preference Ri prime because A is better than B in terms of the true preference. So in this sense, this is an extension of strategy proofness. So, and because Ti gives you the best alternative among the alternatives assigned at Ri, this relation is satisfied under strategy resistance. And this means that Ti is strategy proof for agent I. But the same relation may not be satisfied for agent J who is not I. So in this sense, we need to assume strategy proofness here. And in general, for general social choice correspondence, we can construct implementable social choice correspondence that does not satisfy this condition. This is because we assumed strategy proofness here.
Okay.
Okay. Can it be an answer to your question?
Yeah. Yeah. So this question was from the audience. Thanks, Nozomu. And
Okay.
from the panelists, are there any more questions? Okay, so yeah, we have some more questions from the audience. So this is more of a general question coming from the audience. So how can auctions help to change or this economic strategy? So could you just briefly explain the link between auctions and strategies in a very general sense? I think that's what this question is asking.
Auction and strategies.
Yes.
Well, yes. So here, so this is the model of the auction. So in auctions, well, for example, in the second price auction, you announce your bid or your variation, and in the second price auction, the highest, if you bid the highest one, you win the auction, and you pay the second highest bid here. So the strategy here is how you bid, depending on your variation. Of course, your variation is higher, your bid will be higher. And it is shown that in the second price auction, it is a dominant strategy to bid your true variation as your bid. And you can also consider first price auction. In the first price auction, you bid your you make your bid according to your variation, and you win the auction if your variation is your bid is the highest, and you pay what you bid. In this case, it is known that if you consider Bayesian equilibrium, your bid will be lower than the variation, and this makes the auctioneer's revenue lower than the full surface extraction outcome. But in this case, despite this fact, we assert that full surface extraction outcome may be achieved as a part of the correspondence.
Okay. Thanks. Any more questions from the panelists or from the audience? Okay, so I think that That is all. So thanks a lot, Nozomu, for taking out time and making this and presenting this paper. It's been very interesting listening.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, and so now,
Yeah,
let's
okay. So
go.
thank
Yeah,
you,
Professor Tuteja. Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Ruhi. I now invite Dr. Toteja to present Professor Muto a memento and also provide a brief description of that. So, Professor Dr. Toteja, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muto, for a very informative and excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
I had an opportunity to visit Japan a couple of times to attend WHO FAO Codex meetings. It's a beautiful country and wonderful people. And so in our country also, this part of the country, Rajasthan, having a lot of historical places, very beautiful. And people also in this area are wonderful. I invite you to come to India and see, especially Rajasthan.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, and you will see that in Rajasthan, you know, the craft is the one of the very important profession, you know.
Mhm.
And India is exporting around 25,000 crore rupees craft items to the various countries. So today, on behalf of IIT Jodhpur and also on behalf of Jodhpur City Knowledge Innovation Foundation, a small token of appreciation we are presenting to you. Kindly accept it. This is made by the local artisans, and they had a lot of beautiful other items also. So you please
Oh,
visit our
really?
country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very beautiful.
Thank you, Nozomu, for your
Mhm.
talk. And we, as Dr. Tejira said, we shall look forward to your presence at IIT Jodhpur and linkage with IIT Jodhpur, and particularly
Sure.
for our Center for Computational
Mhm.
and Mathematical Economics, which is part of our AI school.
Mhm.
We'd like you to have a very close relationship with that.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
very close. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, Nozomu, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much for this presentation, and yeah, I hope all is well at your end, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be in touch, right? I'll just email you
Sure.
and coordinate a meeting separately.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so thank you once again, all the panelists and also Professor Muto. I would also
Thank you
like
very
to
much.
thank, I would also like to thank the audience for joining us for this talk. And looking ahead, the Thar Talk series will continue, and we will be back next week on 21st July for the new talk. This will be on computational museology by Professor Sarah Kenderlin. So the details will be posted soon, and I hope you can all join for the next talk. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Nozomu, are you still there?
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, so okay, let's talk for 5 minutes maybe. Although it's a common platform, so others are also there. So yeah, so I got your email yesterday. So yeah, so I have just started reading the paper, although it's a bit late. The things are not too great in India, but things are now settling, and so I have just started looking at the revised draft. So it will take some time, maybe, but let's plan to kind of finish it maybe end of this month or something like that, or maybe early next month.
Sure.
So I will email you regarding this. Maybe we can separately, kind of coordinate on another meeting on Zoom, because this platform I'm not liking very much. This is WebEx.
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I am also not. Unfortunately, I was late in joining because I attended another meeting using the same platform yesterday. That was fine. But today, when I kind of tried to connect, it asked me to download some add-on. I downloaded it, but still it was not working.
Yeah, the same for me. Yeah,
Same
it
for
took
you?
a couple minutes for me.
Yes,
It
yes.
took,
Yeah, so let's meet on Zoom, and we have many other things to catch up, right? This paper and the other project on choice theory and stuff like that. So
okay, yes, of course.
maybe sometime next week. Let me send you an email and
Thank you.
coordinate.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye bye.
See you. Oh, okay. Can I